As the global energy landscape undergoes a seismic shift in 2026, a quiet war has been waged, not with missiles, but with wide purpose and economic reports. In a move that has sent shockwaves through the financial capital of the West, the World Bank recently issued a series of recommendations that have left African leaders and economic experts in a state of absolute disbelief. On the surface, the report appears to offer helpful advice for Nigerians' fuel market, but underneath the technical jargon lies a much darker reality. For the first time in history, a single African-owned refinery has become powerful enough to threaten a global system of dependency that has lasted for decades. The invisible hand of the market is suddenly trying to grab the steering wheel of African industrialization, and the world is watching to see if the continent will finally steer its own course. Good day. You're watching the Global Observer. Our lead story today examines the sinister truth behind why the US and the World Bank appears terrified of the Dangote refinery and how one man's vision is dismantling a century of economic exploitation. To understand why this refinery is a red alert for global powers, we have to look at the simple brutal math of the oil trade. Nigeria is one of the top 10 oil producers on the planet. For years, the script was always the same. Nigeria pumped crude oil out of its own soils and sent it overseas to be refined in Europe and America. Then, like a man selling his own cow only to buy back a steak at 10 times the price, Nigeria bought that same field back in the US dollars. This system didn't just drain the nation's wealth, it kept the currency weak and the people in perpetual fuel queues. But in 2023, Aliko Dangote changed the game forever. He built the largest single-train refinery on the continent, capable of processing 650,000 barrels a day. This isn't just a factory, it is a declaration of independence. For the first time, Nigeria can power itself, and almost immediately, the map of Africa began to change. From Ghana and Togo to South Africa, the continent started buying Nigerian fuel, rewiring the entire energy network of the motherland. But as soon as the refinery began to succeed, the concern from Washington started to pour in. In late 2025, the World Bank published an analysis that felt like a cold bucket of water. They claimed that imported fuel was 12% cheaper and that Nigeria should urgently reopen its borders to refined oil companies. They warned that depending on one refinery created a monopoly risk. It is like a neighborhood that has lived in total darkness for 40 years because the power company refused to run lines, only for the power company to suddenly show up with concerns about safety the moment a local family installs a massive solar grid. Where was this urgent concern for Nigerian consumers when people were sleeping at gas stations for days? The concern only appeared the moment African production became a threat to foreign revenue. To see the real picture, dear viewers, you have to follow the money and look at who actually sits at the head of the table. The United States is the largest shareholder of the World Bank and, by tradition, chooses its president. The G7 nations dominate every major decision. This isn't about a secret meeting to destroy one man. It is about a framework of power that has been in place since the 1980s. Back then, they called it structural adjustment. The message to Africa was always, don't build, just trade. Export your raw cocoa and import chocolate. Export your crude and import petrol. Export your lithium and import batteries. The system is designed to keep Africa in the raw material lane, while the West keeps the high-value processing lane. One refinery in Lagos is currently crashing that system, and that is why the pressure is so coordinated and so fast. The most irritating part of this story is the blatant double standard. When the US or Europe decides that a sector like steel, semiconductors, or electric vehicles is vital for their survival. They spent hundreds of billions in subsidies and tariffs to protect their national interest. No World Bank reports ever warned them about monopoly risks when they build their own champions. But when an African nation does the exact thing to protect its own survival, it is labeled a market distortion. When they do it, it is a brilliant strategy. When we do it, it is a problem. This is a classic case of kicking away the ladder, using it they climbed to prosperity, using industrial protection, and now they are trying to tell Africa that the ladder is inefficient and should be thrown away. The economic impact of the Dangote refinery is not just a theory. It is a 90% drop in low-quality fuel imports. For decades, European refineries use Africa as a dumping ground for surplus. Fuel that didn't meet their own environmental standards. That trade was worth billions of dollars every year. Billions of dollars every year. Every liter of that imported fuel had to be paid for in dollars, which kept the naira under constant pressure and made food and transport more expensive for every Nigerian family. By breaking this chain, Dangote is keeping jobs inside the continent and keeping dollars inside the economy. This is why the timing of the World Bank report was so sinister. It arrived exactly when global oil prices were spiking due to Middle East tension, the precise moment when a local refinery is most needed to protect Africans from global price shocks. Now, let's be honest, monopolies can be risky. If one company controls everything, there must be strong regulation and transparent pricing. But history tells us that every great industrial power, from the US to China, built their champions first and regulated them later. You don't ask a baby to run a marathon before it can crawl. Africa is being asked to follow a set of rules that no developed nation ever followed themselves. Africa to open its doors to competition before it even has a solid industrial foundation. It is a trap designed to ensure that local industries collapse before they can ever truly compete. The good news is that the old script is being torn up. The Nigerian government stood its ground and refused to reopen the import license on foreign terms. Experts and media voices across the continent dismantled the World Bank's claims point by point, forcing the institution to issue a rare and embarrassing declaration. This is a major turning point in Black history. It shows that the days when a report from Washington could dictate the fate of an African economy are coming to an end. Africa is starting to realize that the loudest warnings about what we should do with our resources rarely come from people who want us to win. This battle is about much more than one refinery in Nigeria. It is about the logic of an entire continent. If Africa can refine its own oil, it can process its own gold, it can manufacture its own batteries, it can build its own future. Dangote is already planning a steel plant and a 20,000 megawatt electricity project. The Dangote model of keeping the value at home is spreading like wildfire. Every empire in history understood that whoever controls the processing controls the power. Africa is finally taking that power back, not because anyone gave us permission, but because we built the infrastructure to claim it. As we look forward to the future, the message to the world is clear. The giant is awake. The era of being a passive supplier of raw wealth is over. The refinery stands today as a monument to what is possible when an African vision is backed by African iron. Despite the reports, the pressure, and the sinister warnings, the lights are on and the fuel is flowing. This is the new strategic lens of a continent that has decided to stop asking for a seat at the table and has started building its own. Stay sharp, stay curious, and remember that the true wealth of Africa is not what we dig up, but what we have the courage to build. And this is me thanking you for watching the Global Observer. I urge you to stay right there and keep an eye out for more.